Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch AM from Graham. Ahead today, we're following a wave of terrorist attacks in Israel. Plus,
those thugs that represent the Minneapolis Police Department executed my baby boy, beautiful baby boy, in less than 9 seconds.
Now, activists are calling for a ban on no-knock warrants. We'll have more coming up. Then later, we sit down with recording artist Mandisa as she comes out of the dark in her new book.
Having to confront these issues that I've swept under the rug for so long, not really enjoyable, but I think needed. And it was cathartic for me, and I'm hoping it's going to be for people who read it.
All these stories and more coming up next from the CBN Newsroom.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We want to begin this half hour in Israel. It has now suffered a third significant terror attack in just 8 days. It's killed at least 11 people. Our Chris Mitchell is in Jerusalem and tells us this is the biggest wave of terror to hit Israel in years.
On Tuesday night, the latest attack, a Palestinian gunman on a motorcycle opened fire in the crowded central Israeli city of Bnei Brak. The terrorists killed 5 Israelis, including an Arab policeman. Israeli police said they managed to shoot the terrorist and prevent a much more serious attack. The attack was the second mass shooting in days. ISIS claimed responsibility for an attack in the city of Hadera, where 2 Palestinian Arabs killed 2 and wounded 4. Earlier, an ISIS supporter killed 4 in a stabbing spree in the southern city of Beersheba. In the past week, thousands of Israelis have gathered in funerals around the country. Hundreds mourned a 19-year-old border policewoman killed in one attack, and Israel's education minister lamented the victims of another.
4 human beings who went out on their daily routine were brutally murdered in a murder campaign of a bloodthirsty murderer, only for the reason of them being Jewish.
To address the wave of terror attacks, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett called an emergency meeting of top security officials and, in a nationwide address, told Israelis despite the attacks, Israel would prevail.
Citizens of Israel, these are difficult days. Every few years, the state of Israel deals with a wave of terrorism. After a period of quiet, there is a violent eruption by those who want to destroy us. We face a challenging period. We have experience in dealing with terrorism from the very beginning of Zionism. They did not break us then, and they will not break us now.
Hamas praised the shootings in Bnei Brak as a heroic operation, and on Twitter, some in Gaza passed out candy to celebrate the killings. Hezbollah supporters in Lebanon danced in the streets and waved flags to celebrate the latest attack. The terror attacks come ahead of the Muslim month of Ramadan, where there is often a rise in terrorism. They also come near the anniversary of last year's war between Israel and Hamas. A new study released by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research released sobering findings about the future of Israeli-Palestinian relations. It found 44% of Palestinians said the most effective means of ending the Israeli occupation and building an independent state was, quote, armed struggle. 24% chose popular resistance, a euphemism for sporadic terror attacks. Only 25% chose negotiations. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Now to developments in the war in Ukraine. Russia says it will reduce combat operations around Kyiv and Chernihiv following negotiations between the two countries. However, more explosions occurred just outside of Ukraine's capital overnight. President Volodymyr Zelensky is asking his citizens to stay alert, saying you can trust only concrete results. Meanwhile, President Biden says the negotiations won't lift America's sanctions against Russia, and they will not stop our country's support for Ukraine.
I don't read anything into it until I see what their actions are. We'll see if they follow through on what they're suggesting.
The Pentagon confirms some of the Russian troops are pulling away from Kyiv, but Russia may be moving troops to other parts of the country, such as the Donbas region, to escalate the war.
Our assessment is that their intention is to reposition forces and bolster their efforts elsewhere.
Peace talks are still expected to continue. The Food and Drug Administration has given the green light for a second COVID booster for Americans 50 and older. It comes as the new Omicron subvariant is now the dominant strain in the United States. Charlene Aaron is on this story.
The FDA's decision paves the way for a fourth dose of the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines to Americans over 50, especially those with underlying health conditions, which put them at risk for severe complications from COVID.
If it's been at least 4 months since you've been vaccinated with your first booster dose, you should seriously consider getting another booster dose.
The new boosters will be available right away, and people can get them at their local pharmacies and doctors' offices. The recommendation for the second booster comes as COVID-19 cases have dropped to low levels after the winter surge of the super contagious Omicron variant. CDC data shows that 2 vaccine doses plus a booster still provide strong protection against severe disease and death. The highly contagious subvariant BA2 is now dominant in the U.S., making up an estimated 55% of new infections.
It's starting to create a surge in many parts of the country. So it makes sense that many people may want to up their immunity as we potentially head into a surge.
When asked if the president will roll up his sleeve for the new shot, the White House saying,
obviously, if his doctor recommends that he receive a fourth booster, then he would, but he'll make that decision in consultation with his doctor.
Some agree that another dose is needed.
So if we do that and we do it once a year, even for a few years, I think things may get back to normal later. But, you know, people just have to realize it's not political. It's all about health.
If this is something that's going to keep me and my family and my friends from getting sick, then I'm willing to do it.
The FDA also hinted that a 5th booster may be needed in the fall to protect against a new wave of COVID that's currently spreading overseas. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
And joining us now with more on this is medical reporter Lori Johnson. So, Lori, why draw the line at people 50 and older?
Well, we know, Ephraim, that the #1 risk factor for severe disease and death is age. A lot of people said maybe we should cut it off at 65 and older. But the second biggest risk factor is weight. We know obesity is a very real problem. So we have a lot of people, a third of the population that's obese and another third that's overweight. So that's why they lowered it down to 50. And so people need to consider their risk factors. Health experts say if we have another surge, praying that we don't, but if we have another surge, that this second booster could save thousands of lives and prevent tens of thousands of hospitalizations.
So does this mean that everyone in that age range should get the shot?
You know, what's really interesting about this is and the big takeaway is that the FDA is not recommending a second booster. They are green lighting. They approved it. So really what folks need to do is call their doctor. Get your doctor to tell you or advise you on whether you need it. There are so many people who were vaccinated. I think of my mom, who's 85 years old. She first got her vaccination in January of 2021, which is over a year ago. And then she was boosted in August, which is like about 8 months ago. She has a lot of comorbidities. I'm sure her doctor's going to advise her to get a booster. But, you know, this varies from person to person. And so, no, this is not necessarily a recommendation for everyone over 50. It is definitely on a case-by-case basis.
All right, Lori, thank you so much for that. No-knock warrants allow police officers to enter a residence without warning. Some are demanding a nationwide ban on the practice. That includes Karen Wells, whose son, Amir Locke, died when police were serving a no-knock warrant.
You are going to pass the law of the no-knock warrants, ban it, starting here in the Twin Cities, where my son was born and raised.
Coming up, we're going to explore why some say the practice is still needed, even as others are protesting it. Stay with us. Violent crime is on the rise nationwide, and one police tool in the fight against crime is the no-knock warrant. Some say it's necessary, while others think it is too risky and can lead to innocent people being killed at the hands of police. CBN's Brody Carter takes us to the story.
No-knock warrants are a byproduct of the war on drugs during the Nixon administration. Today, they're allegedly used in high-risk situations to apprehend suspects wanted for violent crimes. But as the effort to ban them is growing, departments are scrambling to choose a path forward. This as cries for social justice echo in city streets. What you're about to watch may be disturbing for some viewers. Minneapolis police granted a no-knock warrant, quietly enter this apartment, then announce themselves.
Police search warrant! Police search warrant!
They apparently awaken 22-year-old Amir Locke. As he reaches for a gun, an officer shoots and kills him.
Those thugs that represent the Minneapolis Police Department executed my baby boy, beautiful baby boy, in less than 9 seconds.
In this case, however, the warrant was for Locke's 17-year-old cousin and 2 other homicide suspects. Locke had a license for the gun within his reach.
Say his name. Amir Locke.
No charges have been filed in this case. The officer behind the gun is on leave as the investigation continues. A deep look into the history of no-knock warrants exposes massive growth and a deadly past. Numerous studies estimate the annual number grew from 1,500 in the early 80s to more than 20,000 today. And in just one 6-year period between 2010 and 2016, a New York Times investigation found these raids led to the deaths of at least 81 civilians and 13 police officers.
You can't control what a suspect does. That's the problem.
In 31 years on the force, Sergeant Mike McGrew investigated some of Santa Barbara's most violent crimes. The former hostage negotiator and major crimes detective believes in the use of no-knock warrants.
This is not the norm. When you see something that goes wrong, you have to remember the tens of thousands of things that went right through America in that very single day.
Still, Locke's death combined with the high-profile case of Breonna Taylor, shot and killed by Louisville police in her own home, has ignited the effort to ban them.
You are going to pass the law of the no-knock warrants, ban it, starting here in the Twin Cities, where my son was born and raised.
4 states have banned no-knock warrants: Florida, Oregon, Tennessee, and Virginia, while 34 states have some restriction or limitation.
Unfortunately, over a period of time, as they were being used, they resulted in a higher number of serious injuries and deaths to law enforcement and occasionally also to suspects.
Commander Thor Eels is the executive director for the National Tactical Officers Association, responsible for training SWAT teams nationwide. Eels no longer teaches no-knock protocols because he feels the danger outweighs the benefit. He adds there are alternatives.
There's the contain and call out. So you simply surround the place and you make a phone call, you make an announcement through speakers or something of that nature. There are probably 4 or 5, without giving up the whole playbook, alternatives that are available to law enforcement to still take a suspect into custody, to still be able to go in and effect a search.
Still, he says nothing puts an end to the controversial policy.
The United States has a very fragmented approach to law enforcement. You know, there are between 18 and 21,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States, and there is no one standard.
While a number of local and state governments have adopted safer alternatives, there is an effort to backtrack somewhat. A Republican-sponsored measure in Virginia's House of Delegates would repeal no-knock bans, working to fix a chaotic situation by implementing a fixed amount of time police should wait before entering. While declining an interview, the sponsor tells CBN News it's unlikely to pass.
No justice, no peace.
Commander Eels argues it's time to implement safer tools for police to use in their investigations. The challenge, however, is the cost of trying to force a single playbook on the sheer number of agencies nationwide.
Is there room for law enforcement to improve in many respects? The answer is absolutely yes. If you start to set these national standards, many of these agencies just don't have either the personnel and or the budgets to meet that. And so the challenge with that in a national standard, so to speak, in setting it is it will be very expensive.
The search for the silver bullet to stymie this crime surge continues to push forward, and controversial tactics like no-knock warrants will likely be a part of the conversation, with fresh reminders that the men and women who toe the thin blue line are not above the law. Now society seeks alternatives to hopefully mitigate these unintended consequences, not only for police, but also the communities they serve. Brody Carter, CBN News.
Still ahead, recording artist Mandisa shares how she came out of the darkness and found God's joy. We've got the story for you when we come back. Stay with us. Mandisa Lynn Hundley is known to her music fans as simply Mandisa. The Grammy and Dove Award winner has penned a new book. It is called Out of the Dark, My Journey Through the Shadows to Find God's Joy. Haven't seen music this year, but we are seeing a new book. A second book, I think, right?
Yeah, my first one was right after American Idol, so it's been a few years.
But he's proven I can trust in him, and yeah, I believe it.
What prompted this story? Out of the Dark is the title. You talk a lot about personal struggles and life. What prompted you to start to share this?
I actually had an album that released in 2016 with the same title, Out of the Dark, and in it I talked a lot about mental health. And as I was having those conversations, I realized this is an area that so many people struggle with. And so I thought it was, we need to really start talking about this, especially as the body of Christ. I think there's such a stigma surrounding it. So just wanting to prompt conversations about this issue that's really plaguing so many people.
Tell me about the process, because I imagine this had to be deep to open up and to go into all of these things and to share. What was that process like for you, and how did you feel doing it?
Yeah, not easy. It wasn't really an enjoyable process, if I'm being honest. But yeah, one of the things I've learned is that we're, anytime that we're feeling comfortable, I mean, it feels good to be comfortable, but so often really the effectiveness and the healing comes from being uncomfortable. And so having to confront these issues that I've swept under the rug for so long, not really enjoyable, but I think needed. And it was cathartic for me, and I'm hoping it's going to be for people who read it as well.
What did you learn in going through this?
Well, one of the things that I learned is, I think with my relationship with God, I felt like I couldn't say certain things. Like, I always had to, be respectful and maybe not talk about the ugly things. But, as I have read the Bible and see people like David, who's a man after God's own heart, he let God have it all, like when he was angry or when he was sad or when he was upset. And learning, I think that's what God is after. Like, talk to him about the things that maybe you would try to keep hidden. That's been a big lesson for me, is letting God into those dark places that I'm trying to keep him out of.
You open up with a rather difficult story. Your longtime hairstylist is going through, pregnancy and cancer at the same time.
Yeah.
Tell me about that, and having to visit with her at the end. What was that like?
Yeah, she was my hairstylist. She sang background for me. She was a great friend of mine. And so when she was diagnosed with breast cancer while she was pregnant, it was bittersweet. She had been longing for another child, and he was born. He's beautiful and healthy, and I really believe that her healing was just around the corner. I really believed that God was going to heal her. So when she passed away, it just kind of shook the foundation and started questioning a lot of things about prayer and about God and whether he hears and whether he cares. And the darker that it got, like, that is just such a slow fade into depression where I was just sweeping it under the rug and not dealing with it. But it had me questioning a lot of things and isolating. And that, for me, I've come to understand, that's the danger zone for me, is when I'm pushing everybody away. And I learned that through that process, is that's when I need to really pay attention to my mental health, is when I'm isolating from everybody.
When did you first realize that you were dealing with a struggle as far as mental health goes?
Yeah, I call it the deep dark in the book. It was when I was considering taking my own life. I was just tired of it all. that's when I was like, okay, this is not just going through a bad moment. This is really serious. And it was at that time that my friends had essentially an intervention and pretty much said, we love you just as you are, but we love you too much to leave you that way. That's what prompted me to get counseling and to deal with some of these issues, is because I had people who were fighting on my behalf for me.
So what's your prayer for this book now that it's out for the world to read, and you're going to be talking about it, and I imagine traveling and sharing even more? What's your prayer for this?
Yeah, I have this vision of people sitting around in living rooms and coffee shops and discussing it. Like, I love the thought of people reading it, but one of the things that I've learned throughout this journey is community is so important to God. It's what He created us for. And so I'm hoping it's going to spark conversations with other people. I love people reading my story, but I really wanted to have people looking inward and to say, okay, how do I relate to this story that I just read? And what is God trying to teach me through it? So that's my hope. I hope it prompts conversations that's going to lead people to healing.
For more uplifting entertainment news, be sure to join me in Studio 5 this evening. We're traveling to Utah to visit Angel Studios for a chance to meet the executives behind The Chosen. From there, we're going to head to the Lost City, where we'll find actors Sandra Bullock, Channing Tatum, and Daniel Radcliffe. And then we'll dive into the remake of a comedy classic, Cheaper by the Dozen. You can catch Studio 5 on the CBN News Channel this evening at 8:30 Eastern. You can also download the CBN News app and watch it on demand. Coming up, C. Mandisa's music video that inspired her latest book. It's called Out of the Dark, and it's coming up right after this. Stay with us. Time now for your Wednesday word, and today's word is blessing. With that, perhaps you should make this your prayer today. God, let me be an answer to someone's prayer. Use me to be a blessing or even the miracle they are waiting to see. With that word, I encourage you to make this a wonderful Wednesday, and be sure to have yourself a wonderful rest of the week. Want to leave you today with the song Out of the Dark by recording artist Mandisa. Remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel at any time or online at cbnnews.com. Have a wonderful Wednesday. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.
With all my mistakes.